Well, good evening, everyone. Let me do a very brief introduction before I hand over to Keith. Most of you won't know me, but the name is Barry Page, Chair of the Membership Subcommittee of HOS, but also the editor of Kingfisher. Welcome this evening to the second of our series of talks, which we plan to run over the coming weeks as we work our way through the current situation and inability to meet in person and hold various talks and events. We had a fantastic turnout last week, just shy of 80 turned up for last week's talk, and tonight's been oversubscribed. We're running it twice tonight, so thank you to Keith, who's going to do this talk twice this evening. But welcome to you all, and we'll get going just a minute or two. Just a couple of house rules. I have hopefully muted everybody just so that we can avoid any background noise. A number of participants tonight did actually post questions in advance, and the intention is to try and get through all of the questions that were posted in advance of this evening. There is an opportunity to ask additional questions. Hopefully most of you will be somewhat familiar using Zoom, but if you're not, at the bottom of the screen there is a chat function. If you hover over the bottom of your screen, if you post a question through there, I'll do my best to monitor them. And at the end, as we seek to kind of pull and get through the questions that have been passed, I'll do my best to try and pose their questions to Keith, subject to having enough time to get through. We will need to, unfortunately, finish fairly promptly at 8:30, given we're running a second session afterwards. But anyway, without further ado, I'm going to pass over to Keith. I'm sure Keith doesn't need an introduction, but for the avoidance of doubt, Keith is the chair of HOS. Many members will have seen Keith hopefully at Prime Membership Members Days meetings and other events, but clearly extremely knowledgeable. I know last week's talk went down extremely well. We had some really good feedback. But tonight's talk is about what to see over the next few months. We've had 3 months, but the coming months. I'm sure the primary focus will be in and around Hampshire, but I know Keith will stretch beyond Hampshire. So without further ado, Keith, can I pass over to you, good self, and get this evening's talk underway? We've now got 65 participants that have joined us tonight.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much indeed, Barry, for the introduction, and good to see everybody here again tonight. On the screen, you'll see 2 of my favorite books from when I was a small boy, the Ladybird books on autumn and winter, and I still look at them today and think they really are fantastic. I used to just sit there and look through the pictures. They always manage to fit more birds onto a picture than you'd see in an entire day, but even so, they're still very memorable. So we're going to talk about autumn and also winter, because we're in autumn and winter is pretty soon. Just going to see if I can move the slide, which should happen. Sometimes it freezes on, and it has. So let's see what we can do now. There we go. 2 slides quickly. There we go. Right, so we've got some very nice autumn fog already. This is in the New Forest. Beautiful early sunrise if you're up early enough, and it comes through the fog. We may well have some stormy weather ahead. That's a day at Portsmouth not too many years ago, where the sea really did get very rough indeed, and that can bring in some interesting birds which you're not expecting. And of course, over the time between now and January, we may see some snow, although it seems these days we don't get very much snow, so maybe we won't. But those are all things that may well affect the birds that we will see. And already we've got a lot of redwings and fieldfares coming in. I'm actually seeing in my local area, in the sort of Hampshire-Surrey border, more fieldfares than redwings at the moment. But there's the redwing with the, very much like a song thrush, but with a very distinctive red underwing as it flies off, and that very noticeable eyebrow as well. These birds come from Scandinavia, Norway, and Sweden in particular. And here's the fieldfare, a much bigger bird, about the size of a missel thrush, pretty aggressive, quite large and loud when they're flying around. And as I say, I'm seeing more of those at the moment. They may well move away. What we find is they quite often arrive in October, early November, eat all the berries, and then they have to move further west, and they head towards probably Wiltshire, then onwards to Devon and so on. And eventually they come back through in the early part of the year, maybe March. And Brambling, I know one person in particular asked they wanted to see a bit more information on Brambling. So here's Brambling. I had my first one last weekend. They're sort of boom and bust birds. At the moment, we don't get very many, but about 10 years ago, we had a lot. And again, quite a few about 5 years ago. So in a year or two, we should get a big year for Bramblings. It depends very much on how much food they've got in their native area in Northern Europe. But it's a very nice looking bird, rather like a chaffinch, a little bit smaller than a chaffinch, with a very obvious white rump when it flies off. So if you want to see Brambling, go to Slovenia, because there is a flock of Bramblings, thousands and thousands of them together in the winter. That's where you have to go if you want to see a big flock. I've never seen anything like that in Hampshire or anywhere in Britain, actually. But just to see where they are, I took some recent records from the last 2 or 3 winters, and you'll see there a map of Hampshire. There are only Hampshire records shown there. We don't have Isle of Wight, although it does seem to be, there's one record for the Isle of Wight. But anyway, they're all Hampshire records. And you can see a big concentration down in the southwest in the New Forest. So if you want to see Brambling, quite often the New Forest, the woods around, the Boulderwood area, the Ornamental Drive, the Arboretum at Blackwater, those are all good places to see Brambling. They very often go there at the end of the day to roost. Another bird that will be arriving soon, may have arrived already, is the Bittern. Not an easy one to see though, but you've got to really go somewhere where you can sit in a hide to get a good view of a Bittern, I think. And Blashford Lakes is the place that everybody goes to for Bittern. I'm going to put some maps up later in case people are not familiar with the sites. But Bitterns arrive, there are probably about, on average, might be about 8 or 10 Bitterns in Hampshire every winter, although of course there will be others I expect that we don't see. Another bird we might get will be Bewick Swan. Now, they used to be a regular winter visitor to Hampshire, not so much now. We just get the odd one or two. But the place to look for those is Harbridge, the water meadows at Harbridge, just to the north of where Blashford Lakes is. Now, a couple of birds that people really do like in winter, and that's the black-necked grebe and the Slavonian grebe. So here's the black-necked grebe with that beautiful red eye. It's got a little kind of peaked head. In winter plumage, it's very grey and dull, just like indeed Slavonian grebe. Black-necked grebes are particularly seen in the Langston Harbour on the eastern side by what we call the Hayling oyster beds. And if you look at the map, you'll see they also turn up in other places. So on the western side, last winter, there was at least one bird, sometimes two, I think, over at Blashford Lakes. That's that congregation of grid references on the left-hand side. But they also occasionally turn up along the coast, up off Western Shore and, as I mentioned, over to the east in Langston Harbour. Now here's the Slavonian grebe. Pretty similar, actually. A much whiter face, but a very red beady eye again. But, you know, really two birds that are quite hard to tell apart. Generally speaking, though, I find Slavonian grebes usually not where the black-necked grebes are in Langston Harbour. So if you're watching them there, that's probably going to be black-necked grebe. Let's have a look at the map of where they were. This is last winter's records. You can see a big congregation of records down along the coast around Milford, going along, you know, Key Haven and Pennington. Also another group not far off Titchfield, Hill Head, and again, quite a concentration again. Although there actually are records there in Langston Harbour, which I find a bit surprising. That might be a mistake. I wonder if I got that around the wrong way. I don't know. Anyway, those are the two birds. Black-necked grebe at the bottom, Slavonian grebe at the top. Slavonian grebe generally has a flatter head. The black-necked grebe has that peaked head, as you can see. Once you get your eye in, they are quite different. And I think the main thing to look for on the Slavonian grebe is that the really pale, sort of puffy white face. So the other thing people look for on the coast is divers. Great Northern Diver is the most common along our coast, with that huge, huge dagger-like beak. I mean, it almost looks like a reptile. It's really kind of weird-looking bird. They are right the way along the coast. There are very few places where they're not found. They're also right up in Southampton water as well. So if you want to see those, go to somewhere like Western Shore, or Hythe. And if we look at red-throated diver, that's a smaller bird with a smaller beak. And the typical thing about red-throated diver is actually has the beak always tilted slightly upwards, as you can see there. A little bit grey and white compared to the great northern diver. They are not as common as great northern divers, but they're in the same sort of places going along the coast there. And finally, the black-throated diver, which is the rarest of them. Now, there are years when we have quite a few black-throated divers, but we haven't had them recently much. The plumage is much more obviously dark and light. And if you look on the side, the flanks, you know, the side body of the bird, you can see that white patch. And that's nearly always visible when the bird's in the water. And that's a real key identification point. The beak is not upturned, and it's not a huge dagger like the one on a great northern diver. Last winter, we had a few around, mainly in the east, but no, not many at all, really. So they're all three of them on the same screen, so you can compare the beak size. The great northern diver, top left, with that huge beak. Black-throated diver, a much smaller beak, and then you've got the red-throated diver with a little upturned beak. Once you get your eye in, these things are actually a lot easier. I know they seem quite hard when you first start out. We all see Brent geese on the coast, very much coastal bird. We don't get them anywhere inland, excepting occasionally by accident. This is the dark-bellied Brent goose. Now, I wanted to explain Brent geese. Basically, there is one species called the Brent goose. So they have dark-bellied form, which is the one that we get. We also get the young ones, and if you look at the back of the bird, you can see those stripy marks on the back indicate that it's actually a young bird of this year. Also, it hasn't got the neck collar yet. If I just go back, you'll see the adult's got the neck collar. And we also occasionally get this one, light-bellied form of the Brent goose. And you can see that's a very pale bird indeed, one to look out for. But be warned, it is rare. And I do know every year people do send me records getting that one the wrong way around and sending in flocks of 50 or so. We just get a few light-bellied Brents, and usually very early on in the season. So there's the dark-bellied again, just to give you a comparison. And where do they come from? Well, the light-bellied actually mainly go to Ireland. They nest over in Canada, as you can see on the left-hand side. And the dark-bellied ones that we get, they all nest up in Siberia, and they fly right across Europe, the northern parts of Europe, to get into the UK. So there's a little bit of overlap, but as you can see, two populations of the same species. They look different. I guess you could almost split them off as separate species, and indeed some people have suggested that. And just be aware of this one. People do mention it occasionally. This is the American form, the proper American West Coast form of the Brent goose, which is known by them as the Brant or the black Brant. And that is a rare bird. We only get one or two of those a year. You can see it's got a very dark head. The thing to notice, though, is that the contrast of the side of the bird with its back, really quite distinctive. And if I just show you the one that we normally get, you can see there's no contrast like that. It is a little bit paler. Just to go back, there's the black Brant. So keep an eye out for that. It's quite a rare bird. I've only seen it a few times myself. Goldeneyes, well, they're arriving now. We used to get goldeneyes in many places in the county, but they seem to be pretty much restricted to the coast now. Male on the right, female on the left. There are the locations for last year's goldeneyes. So a few of them up at Blashford Lakes on the left-hand side, a few of them down on the marshes at Key Haven and Pennington, up Southampton Water a little bit, and also a congregation over in Langston Harbour. Not in the north of the county now, as far as I know. Goosander. Well, this is a fantastic duck. And the amazing thing about Goosander, they actually nest in Hampshire now. They never used to, but they nest in the Avon Valley. And we have several pairs nesting every year now, which is one of the biggest changes we've had to our bird life over the last 20 years. Male at the front, female at the back. Now, you've got a chance, if you're in northern Hampshire, of having a look in on this one. And you'll see that on the some of the gravel pits around Eversley and Yakeley, also over towards just north of Basingstoke, the Vine and so on, you'll see you've got Goosander there. But they're also in the Test Valley and pretty much all the way along the coast in the central part. Similar bird though, the red-breasted merganser. This one does not nest in Hampshire, so any birds we see in the summer are non-breeders. This one is very much a coastal bird. Similar to look at, a little bit slimmer, streamlined. If you look at the map here, these are all the records for last winter, and you can see absolutely stuck to the coast. They don't go anywhere inland. So if you've got a bird looking like that on a gravel pit in the northern part of Hampshire, it's probably going to be a goosander. 999 times out of 1,000. So a bit of a rare one now, Scaup, a bird we don't get very much, although last winter we did have a few. The male at the front, female at the back. The female is a tricky bird because there are quite a few tufted ducks that get this white facial mask. And the thing to look for is on the side of the head. If you see just sort of bottom right of the eye, the female there has got a slightly paler patch on her cheek. And that's something you can nearly always see on female Scaup. Whereas the ones that are usually hybrids, a real mixture of maybe potchard and tufted duck, they don't have that at all. So look out for those. And there were Scaup in a few places last year. You'll see there a couple of places in the Avon Valley and also down on the coast around Southampton and a bit further east too. Purple sandpiper. Well, that's a bird that we're lucky to get. We're just getting them now. They come, they nest in Norway, and they join us every winter. They disappear probably in April. Numbers actually do go up in the spring as birds come through from elsewhere on their way further north. And if you look at purple sandpiper location, this is the place, Southsea Castle. Now, there is a bit of work going on there at the moment. I don't know how that's going to affect the viewing on the coast this coming winter, but where I've put those two arrows, if you look down on the shoreline there, you've got a load of rocks with weed, and you get the purple sandpipers in those rocks, usually halfway between high tide and low tide. Don't go at high tide. They'll probably have to be somewhere else by that point, and they usually fly out and maybe sit on one of the forts in the middle of the Solent, but halfway between high and low is pretty good for those. So that's the purple sandpiper. You don't get very many either, only get maybe 5 or 6 usually. Now, green sandpiper is a bird that joins us for the winter. It's a bird that we do get actually for a lot of the year. So they actually come back from where they nest up just below the Arctic Circle, northern Scandinavia, and they come back actually and join us at the end of June. And those are birds that have failed to breed, maybe haven't had any young or didn't get a partner. And they stay with us right the way through until the next spring. So the last ones leave us in May. So there's really only about 1 month when we don't have green sandpipers. Lovely bird with a spotty back and found in quite a lot of places like watercress beds, gravel pits. This is a bird you could see anywhere in central parts of Hampshire on a wet, little stream or something. And there they are. You can see the records there up in northern Hampshire, quite a few. If you're anywhere near where I live, Maple Durwell or cress beds is very good, just near Basingstoke. But I think you'll probably also see it at quite a few other places. The watercress beds at Alresford are pretty good too. But as you can see, quite a scattering of them. Now, common sandpiper is a bird which is, of course, a summer migrant from Africa that comes to Britain, usually arriving in May, nesting up in the highlands of Scotland and bits of Wales. But actually, a few of them stay behind. They don't go to Africa. They've learned there's no need to, and they're with us the whole time. They may be different birds, of course, from the ones that come through in the spring. But anyway, look at the map there, and they stay on the coast. So there's not many involved here. There'll probably only be less than 10 birds making up these records, but we have common sandpipers around in the winter. Now, people do get confused between these two birds. So take a look at them. On the left, green sandpiper, on the right, common sandpiper. And you can see, yep, they are quite similar, but the green sandpiper's got spots on it. The common sandpiper has a very obvious sort of armpit where the white goes up into its side of its body. But the thing to do is to see it fly. And if you look at the bottom left, you can see the green sandpiper's got a white rump and the common sandpiper does not. So that is the key feature to look for when you're doing that. Now, another bird that actually is a summer migrant to Britain, sandwich tern, but actually they stay here in Hampshire all year. It's amazing that they're here. They spend the whole of the winter with us, mainly in the eastern side and up Southampton Water. So if you see a sandwich, a warmer climate for them, and they're happier to stay around here now. So a couple of birds that we will see on the coast are Guillemot and Razorbill. These do not nest in Hampshire, of course. We haven't got any cliffs. They do nest on the Isle of Wight and further west in Dorset. And they come to us in the winter. Quite often you can see them close to the shore. You might see them, say, somewhere like Hayling Island or further west. I saw one off Hurst just the other day. So Guillemot at the top, Razorbill on the bottom, a completely different shape, beak, and I guess from a distance, some quite difficult to tell apart, especially when they're just flying. But you know, you look at the Razorbill, it looks like it's got a huge wedge of a beak. Now, I know a lot of people like owls, and short-eared owls are birds that come to us in the winter. They don't breed with us, but they do come occasionally in the winter. There's been one down at least one at Farlington Marsh. Where do you go and see them? Well, Bransbury Common's quite a good place, which is just south of the A303 as you're going west through the northern part of the county. So that's just southeast of Andover, near Barton Stacey, Bransbury Common. But Farlington Marsh is probably as easy as anything, and certainly I saw some photographs taken there last weekend, so they're definitely around. And there's a map showing you the locations for short-eared owls last winter. So quite a concentration on the coast, but one or two up in the north. And you can see, if you look, so the dot that's just to the east of Andover, that'll be Barton Stacey. Can't remember what the ones were otherwise. They probably were just random birds moving around. But in the north, Bransbury Common is the place to go to. If anybody needs any more information, just get in touch with me. You can find my email address in the Hampshire Bird Report or indeed on the HOS website. Now, somebody did ask about long-eared owl, and it's got to be the bird that more people want to see than anything else. And, you know, if somebody gave me £100, said, look, you know, you can have the £100 only if you get a long-eared owl, I reckon I wouldn't get £100 very often. I hardly ever see this bird myself. It's got to be the most under-recorded bird too, because I do know they're around. 4 pairs definitely nested in Hampshire this year rather. 2 in the north and 2 in the south. Bizarrely, the 2 in the south were only 400 meters apart, and the 2 in the north were only about 1.5 kilometers apart. So I think what we get is concentrations of long-eared owls where they nest, and therefore we're going to be doing some investigations next summer to see if we can find them near to where they nested this year. We don't ever put news out about long-eared owls because they're easily spooked, and we don't want to disturb them. Now, if you do want to see long-eared owl, then go to Serbia. And I know a friend who went to Serbia, and he went there for 2 days, and he saw 500 long-eared owls. And here are just a part of a group of 50 sitting in a tree. So I think rather than trying to worry about seeing it in Hampshire, which you almost never will, go to Serbia, and that's what you're going to see. If you want to know about those trips, again, let me know. I know where you can book them. So another bird for the winter is the water pipit. It's a bird that nests on the mountains in Europe, in the Alps and so on. And it comes through here and spends the winter on our watercress beds. 1 or 2 of them along the coast as well. A bit of a confusion species, really. I mean, it's a big bird. It doesn't look big there, but it is quite a big, fat bird with quite a white throat. Go to the field guide and have a look at the diagnostic features. You're going to have to look at other things too. So if you're on the coast and you see a dark pipit on the shoreline, for example, when I'm walking around at Pennington, the birds that are nearly always on the rocky shoreline are rock pipits. The ones that are just about, 5 meters to the other side of the path, they're meadow pipits. You don't normally get meadow pipits on the rocks, and you don't normally get rock pipits on the meadow, but You know, it does happen, but they are quite different. Now, the water pipit you'll find on watercress beds mainly, but also on some flooded meadows. A quick map of where we have water pipits. So you've got up around Alresford at the top left, top right of the map. Alresford is where we've got all those rather nice cress beds just to the north of Alresford Pond. Pinglestone, for example, Pinglestone cress beds. They're quite easy to see, and you won't have to worry about rock pipit because there won't be any rock pipits there. Other places, though, left-hand side of the map, you've got Blashford Lakes. Bottom left, you've got all the area around Key Haven where there are one or two of them, not a huge number. And they're dotted around elsewhere. Rather than try and sort of get lucky, I would actually go to the watercress beds up at Alresford, and I can tell you more about that later. So those are those key sites that I've mentioned. I didn't mention Titchfield Haven, I didn't mention Lower Test Marshes, but I would go to Alresford to see the water pipit. Black redstarts, they turn up on the coast in winter. We do get one or two breeding as well, but it is a very rare breeding bird in Britain, which is bizarre because they're really common over in France. Maybe we will get more of them eventually. But there's the female on the left, male on the right. And then sometimes in this time of the year, the male doesn't look anything like as good as that, as he hasn't yet fully molted. Where were they last winter? Well, these are just the winter sightings, and you can see they were mainly along the coast. They're looking for places where they're going to be finding mild temperatures. So they were around Milford, I know, Hurst Castle, quite often see them on there. I'm trying to remember the name of the place. There's a place in Portsmouth where they quite often go to. Keep an eye on the Going Birding website because people are always reporting when they see black redstarts. Quite often they're on people's houses and then people's gardens too. Now, waxwings, it's another one, a sort of boom or bust story. We don't normally get waxwings, but occasionally we do. And here's one really close up, giving you a chance to see that wonderful plumage. They go for berries, so they'll look for cotoneasters and things like that. They will go into towns like, for example, Totton. They quite often go into car parks of supermarkets because they tend to plant these berry-bearing bushes. And when you get quite a few, you really do get quite a few. And here they are. They fly in like a big flock of birds, probably get 50 at a time coming down, flying around like starlings. Now, unfortunately, I've never been able to feed one by hand, but I do know a man in Shetland who, in fact, Fair Isle, who did feed one by hand. In fact, he had 3 at one point. Apparently, you don't have to wear the hat. They will come as long as you've got the right kind of food. I don't have a hat like that, but if I had to have a hat like that to get a waxwing on my hand, I'd be buying one tomorrow for sure. So a couple of birds that are very similar. This is the lesser redpoll, and this is one where people actually make a mistake quite often, and I'm not surprised because look, we've got the lesser redpoll and we've got the common redpoll. Well, you'd think from the name, common redpoll, it's got to be common, hasn't it? Well, it isn't common, it's rare, and because the one that we get, is called lesser redpoll, people think, oh yeah, lesser, well, that's probably least likely then, so it's probably going to be common redpoll. We don't really get common redpolls very much. Every year, usually there's 1 or 2, sometimes as many as 20 or so. But lesser redpoll's the one we get with that nice sort of brown plumage with the red bit on the top of the head. This is one of the common redpolls, which we occasionally get, but they are quite variable. Some of them are brown as well, and some of them are really big. And if we look at this map, you'll see where they all come from. So if you look at this, the one that's the green area, which is basically Britain and bits of France and maybe other parts of Europe, those are lesser redpolls. If you then look to Scandinavia, so Norway, Sweden, and a bit further to east to Russia, you'll see the pink area, and that's the common redpoll. So the common redpolls, they have to go quite a long way if they're going to join us, and they don't therefore often make it. So lesser redpoll is the one we have. Now, if you look just at the top, you've got a little arrow coming down from Iceland, and there you've got a second population of common redpolls, a different race, an absolutely huge bird. And one was seen yesterday, actually ringed up at Yakeley, I think it was one anyway. They don't always leave Iceland. They're so tough, they can stay there through the winter, but occasionally when it does get really tough, they come and join us. So just to remind you, common redpoll, rare, lesser redpoll, not rare, but actually quite a difficult bird to find in the summer, but an easy bird in the winter. Blashford Lakes, for example, on the feeders. Crossbills, well, we call it common crossbill now because there are actually several other species which we could look at, but the only one we really get here is common crossbill. We've had a very good year for crossbills in the New Forest. They've been breeding well. There are good numbers around, so walking around the New Forest, you've got a good chance of seeing crossbill, but the problem is they just fly over. They very rarely land and let you have a good look like this. So learn the call, which is a sort of a chip chip call as they go over, and hopefully you might then be aware and spot them. Another bird that is, again, doing well in the New Forest, we have one of the most important populations in Britain, is the hawfinch. We've probably got 300-400 pairs of hawfinches in the New Forest in the summer, and they will be augmented by many more coming in the winter because we get birds from other parts of Europe that join us. A difficult bird to be sure of where to see, but you know, around Boulderwood is pretty good. They feed underneath the trees with other finches like chaffinches and greenfinches. And I think they quite often still do go to the Blackwater Arboretum, although not as reliable as that used to be years ago. But keep an eye out for that. It's one of the best places in the country to see hawfinch. Now, I know somebody wanted to hear about Willow Tit. And if you were listening to Chris Packham on Autumn Watch, he was talking about that the other day, saying he'd got a Willow Tit on his bird feeders. Well, he may well have done. A friend of mine saw one there when he was at his house, but Willow Tits are pretty much restricted to the north of Hampshire now, and only in a couple of places as well. So look at the plumage. It's got a very buffy undercarriage. It's got a pale wing panel, which you might just be able to see. So if you can see on the wing there's just a few feathers that make it look lighter. And the head is not shiny. The Marsh Tit, which is the bird that's very similar to this, is in fact quite different if you know them well. But, you know, 100 years ago, they only knew of one species. So Willow Tit hadn't even been described, I think, until about 1900. If you want to see Willow Tit, then a good place to go would be up round Fackham, the Netherton Valley. And if you see the road that runs right through the middle of the map I've put there, that's a lovely bit of road, and you walk along there, park maybe by the junction at the bottom, and just walk up and down and look into the woods to the west. And indeed along the side of the road there. There certainly have been Willow Tits there up until last year. I'm not sure about this year, but their numbers are declining, we think, driven by climate change. And just so you know, the thing we now know to look for on Marsh Tits is this whitish mark on the upper mandible. You see that little white mark, the Marsh Tit has it. Also notice it's got a glossy head, which the Willow Tit doesn't. I'm just going to go back to the Willow Tit just to show you. No white mark, and it's not got a glossy head. Marsh Tit, glossy head, and a white mark on the beak. 96% of Marsh Tits have that white mark, and not about 96% of Willow Tits do not. Great Grey Shrike is another bird that we all want to see in the New Forest. It's a special bird of the forest. There's one getting its name of butcher bird, where they it's impaled. Gosh, I don't know what that is. It's probably impaled something lovely like a meadow pipit onto a spike to eat later, and that's why it gets the name of butcher bird, because it has a sort of larder. A great bird to see. Great Grey Shrike is mainly in the New Forest. I would say watch the going birding site to see where people are seeing them. Holm Hill is the place where they were seeing a lot last year, one bird actually. Where the A31 comes right down through the New Forest, if you're driving to, say, Bournemouth, either side of that A31, but particularly the western side around the Milcombe area, that's a good area for them. Bewley Road Station, or the whole of the Bewley Road area, is quite often good. And Leadenhall, which is up in the northwest of the New Forest, that's another area where they regularly go to. But have a look at going birding, because if you just went out and looked for a great grey shrike, you probably wouldn't see one. So a quick look at the places that I've mentioned. I think everybody probably knows Key Haven and Pennington Marshes, but there it is on the right. One or two path closures over the next few weeks. I'm not quite sure whether they're announcing that online, but just be aware. Best thing to do is either park at Key Haven or maybe at Lymington and walk from one to the other if you can, or walk halfway to Pennington and back. And Farlington. So Farlington is the marsh on the coast down in Langston Harbour, and that is a Hampshire Wildlife Trust reserve. The other one, by the way, Key Haven, was Hampshire County Council. This is Hampshire Wildlife Trust, open access for everybody to walk around. Hayling Island, quite a few places on Hayling you can go to. So bottom left, you've got Synor Common. Bottom right, you've got Sandy Point and Black Point, very good for seeing waders. Top left, you've got what I mentioned earlier, the Hayling oyster beds for seeing the black-necked grebes. And then on the top right, I don't really have a name for that bit, but there's a marina there, and you've got quite good viewing off that northeast corner. Titchfield Haven, I think, again, a lot of people know that. Hampshire County Council Reserve, you've got to book at the moment if you want to go. It's a very good place to go for birds generally. And offshore, you've got Hill Head, which is a very good place to watch things like ducks on the water and so on. So in the New Forest, we've got Holm Hill, which I mentioned to you, which is the Great Grey Shrike location, basically just northwest or west of Brockenhurst, easy to get to, surrounded by car parks. Blashford Lakes in the Avon Valley is a Hampshire Wildlife Trust reserve, and that's in the main circle. And I put the little circle at the top for Harbridge, which is the place where I would go to look at the swans in the hope there might be a Bewick swan amongst them. So how do you get information? Well, if you go to the HOS website, we've got on one of the tabs, you can find a whole directory of bird sites. This is only part of them. There are a few others as well. I couldn't get them all on one screen. And you can click on those and read about them. You can go to the Going Birding website, which has immediate information because everybody posts their information as and when they see things. So you can see very quickly what's around, and you can also search it to see what's at a particular site. So if you wanted to find a site, let's say like Eversley Gravel Pits up in the north of the county, you could type in the search part, Eversley Gravel Pits, and it'll then list all the records for you so you can see what's being seen there. And there's also, people say to me there are books to look at. So this is the one that you might look for, the Where to Watch Birds in Dorset, Hampshire and the Isle of Wight. That's a very good book. The 5th edition, which I'm editing, is coming out next year. I'm just about to deliver the text to Bloomsbury in about 2 weeks. So maybe hang on before you buy the next one, but before you buy it, because it will be slightly better in terms of the latest information and so on. So Barry, over to you, and any questions, please.
Many thanks, Keith. Thanks very much for that. Extremely informative. I hope everyone's found that a really helpful insight to what to see and where over the coming few months, particularly when we can hopefully look at becoming more mobile in a few weeks' time. There are just a few questions, Keith. Just actually one clarification point regarding Titchfield. One comment suggesting it actually is closed for the next.
Oh, is it?
So just to share that, everyone, I guess, given the current.
Yeah. I must admit I hadn't seen that announced, but it makes sense. They did it last time. But quite a lot of reserves have remained open through this second lockdown period. I actually think this lockdown period is quite different from the first. I think everybody understands that it's not a good idea to go hugging people, but you know, going birding is not a problem as long as you don't go around in a big gang.
One about sightings, Keith. One question came in was, what's the chances of seeing a white stork? Obviously, there's been quite a lot of media coverage. Anything you can offer there?
Well, most of the white storks that they released at NEP were, these were birds from Poland, a mixture of birds from Poland and birds that were actually the children of birds from Poland. And they were all released back at end of August. And they all went down to Cornwall and quite a lot of them came back again and then went over to France and are already in Spain. But there are a few knocking around. There's certainly been one in the Test Valley on and off. I haven't actually checked Going Birding. I can probably do it whilst we're talking, actually. Going Birding normally has white stork records quite often. So let me just type that in whilst we're doing it. Immediate information for you. It's kind of thing where you're not going to just bump into one, though. You're probably going to have to go and look. And okay, here we go. So the most recent record of white stork was on the 10th of October. That was in the Avon Valley at Harbridge. So yeah, that's over a month now. So that suggests they've probably moved further southwest. I guess they're probably down towards Devon and Cornwall. But keep an eye on Going Birding. It'll tell you what's around.
Similar question, Keith, about spoonbills. Around yet? When might they arrive?
Well, it seems to me spoonbills never seem to go away. We get a lot of young birds. They're mainly Dutch birds. We know that because they've got rings on. And that's a good question. So spoonbill, 7th of November, one was actually at, no, indeed 5 were at Inchmerry. So that's at the opening of the Bewley Estuary. One was at one was at Alresford Pond a while back. That was a month ago. But 7th of November, 5 at Inchmerry on the Bewley Estuary. So yeah, they are here. But probably the biggest numbers are in Poole Harbour, where they get huge numbers. We'll have them breeding eventually. It's just not happened yet.
A couple of others, Keith. One is actually out looking beyond the borders of Hampshire. Actually, before I do that, there's one about also crest beds. What's the general access like around there? I know the area a little bit myself, but views on obviously one needs to respect this. It's a private commercial enterprise, but any thoughts and directions on how best to view what's there without encroaching on private land?
Yeah, you can do it from the road. So if you're at Alresford Pond on the roadside, and if you go basically a bit further north to where the roads all split off and one goes to the right and one carries on, there are some crest beds just there, and you can actually walk along a footpath and just get a little view over the crest beds there. And with binoculars or a telescope, you should see water pipit. I mean, you might even be allowed to walk on, but I wouldn't just do it unless I was given permission. The owners of some of those crest beds are actually members of HOS. And I don't think I can get a carte blanche for everyone to go on there, but I might be able to arrange an outing there one day, perhaps. There are crest beds further east. So if you go from with the car, maybe just go a little bit further east from Alresford Pond on the north side, and at the crest beds there, again, you can park at the road and look over the crest beds very well from there, and you'll probably see green sandpiper and water pipit quite quickly.
Switch actually. So there was one question, Keith, which goes beyond Hampshire. So actually, just obviously a bit difficult to be considering travelling further afield at the moment. But as and when it becomes possible, and hopefully that's not too far off. Norfolk, I know, is a popular destination for many birders.
Yeah.
I recall myself being there just over a year ago. What might one possibly see of in particular interest during the next 2-3 months in the Norfolk area?
Well, I saw that request come in, so I did a little bit of Googling, and if you look here, I've got a map of Norfolk taken off the internet. You can find that for yourself. Just type in birding sites Norfolk and you'll get it. So Titchwell is the RSPB reserve. We're in red with the red arrow, and on the west side of that part of Norfolk, just below, about 5 miles below Hunstanton, or Hunston as they call it, you've got Snettisham, which is an RSPB reserve as well. But you've got all the Broads and you've got plenty of other places too. And here is what you're going to see if you go to Snettisham. At the high tide, you get this amazing congregation of waders, a huge number of oyster catchers down the bottom, and then an even bigger number of knot flying around. And that's just probably 5% of the total that are there. It's a huge spectacle, well worth seeing.
Keith, and I think we've probably got one more, which again is out of context a little bit for tonight, but is a overrun from last week about cuckoos. Obviously, I'll land this one on you, if you might remember. The question is, how do cuckoos know that they are cuckoos?
I don't know. I think basically cuckoos must have some ability, because they obviously never see their parents. They must have some ability to recognize when they're hearing a cuckoo. And I mean, you know, I remember asking this question of a bird watcher, as a young bird watcher aged about 10, you know, kind of annoying question to my tutor. And he said to me that he thought what they did was they saw their reflection in the water when they drank water. I don't think that's the case. I think it's just that they have this inbuilt ability to recognize what they are.
Thanks.
That's a bit of a non-answer, I'm afraid.
There you go. I thought I'd throw that one left field at Keith. There is one that's more on point about this evening's back to Norfolk. Actually, the question here is: are knots and oyster catchers at Snettisham for the entire winter or for any part of it?
So oyster catchers are with us for the whole year, but our numbers are increased during the winter as we get birds from elsewhere. But they nest on the coast. They nest around. They nest on a couple of buildings in Fareham and Portsmouth, but they actually nest on the coast around Langston Harbour and Hayling. Knot, though, are a bird that nests up in the Arctic, so they come through here. Some of the knot go further south, so they're just simply passing through, and some of them stay with us in the winter. So yeah, that's just a winter bird. I do remember, actually, Barry, there was a question from somebody who said, how do I work out where to go for my walks and what can I see? I saw that come in. So I did just prepare something. What I do every day at the moment is I go for a walk near my home. I travel about 3 miles. So I go on the internet and I go on I produce a map and I draw a square on it. And the square will be a tetrad. So in this particular case, that is tetrad SU74E. And I then work out which birds could be here. I make up a list and then I tick them off. In fact, I write down how many I see. Now, it doesn't actually take me that long to do, and that is because I've got the database. So I make an offer, which I probably regret, but I'm very happy to do that for people who would like to go for a walk somewhere but haven't got any idea where they could go near to where they live. So here's an offer for one night only. If you send me an email and you give me your postcode, I will find a place near to where you live and I will send you a list of the birds that you should see or could see, and we'll see how you get on. I'll send you a map as well, otherwise you won't know where you're going. But I will do that. Doesn't take me long, probably takes me 10 minutes to do that. So my email address is keithbetton@hotmail.com. Ask, otherwise I will be doing nothing else for the rest of this month. But happy to do it.
That's very generous of you, Keith. I'm sure you'll get inundated with requests, I can imagine. Two more questions have come in. We've still got a little time. One's about starlings. Are we too late to see starling murmurations? I'm pretty sure I've seen a couple of the last week, but thoughts on the opportunity of seeing them?
Sorry, Barry,
I think I did see a pause there. The question is about starling murmurations, chances of seeing one at this time of year.
Well, yeah, they are around. So there was a big group at Winnell, just outside of Winchester, and I don't know if they are back again this year. Maybe somebody on the call might know, but there were thousands there. But unfortunately, I think Tesco's got upset about it, and so they got the trees cut down. Apparently some health risk, whatever that might be. Where else? Yeah, down at Key Haven last year, I think there were large numbers of starlings roosting in the reed beds. If you go to Key Haven marshes, you've got those reed beds that are right by the parking area. We call it Avon Floods, and I know there were numbers going in there. Quite a few marsh harriers as well, by the way, last year. Other than that, I haven't seen many in the last couple of winters, but those are two good areas to go.
One which is related, just popping across the little stretch of water to the Isle of Wight. I know beyond our immediate boundary, but obviously very close to us. Any particular key spots on the Isle of Wight that you might recommend?
Well, I really like the Newtown marshes. If you go to the go across on the ferry from Lymington to Yarmouth, and you're then only 15 minutes away from Newtown marshes, that's your best bet for seeing one of the white-tailed eagles, because the release site is only a couple of kilometres from there, and the birds quite often come in and feed on grey mullet. They actually grab grey mullet out of the harbour as they fly over. There are currently 8 of them there. So you've got a good chance if you spend all day. Other than that, I would go to the east side. I mean, I think Bembridge is good. The Braiding Marshes RSPB reserve is excellent as well. The thing about the Isle of Wight, I would say, is that there's not a lot you're going to get there that you can't just get in Hampshire, but it is a lovely day out. So I do recommend it. Good way of getting a different scene, and it's a little bit like going back in time. You know, much more rural than Hampshire is, and not quite so many cars zipping around.
A comment just in advising or suggesting Fish Lake Meadows is also a good location for darling murmurations.
Ah, good. Yeah. Fish Lake Meadows is a good place to go. It can be a little bit busy at times. I know that people were quite upset about the distancing issues at Fish Lake in the first lockdown, but I think people know what they're doing now. And if you don't, well, I can't really help.
Keith, I'll just pause to see if there's any more questions going.
Sure.
We've got a few minutes left, but I know we're keen to finish properly. But
No, that's fine. I'm happy to
just open up if anyone's got any final question or questions. We could probably take 1 or 2 more. Just nothing appearing, Keith.
Just a quick word about cuckoos. I said this at the last talk. You know, although we have our own cuckoo, there are about 150 cuckoo species in the world. Some of them do what our cuckoo does, which is it lays in other birds' nests. But some cuckoos actually just lay their own eggs, and other species, that is. And amazingly, some cuckoos do both. So they actually lay in another bird's nest and have them act as a foster parent, and then they go and make their own nest. So they get the best of both worlds. It's a really amazing family of birds.
One question that's just sneaked in, Keith, is regarding short-eared owls. Do they hunt all day?
Short-eared owls don't generally hunt all day, no. They tend to be most active towards the end of the day. So what you will find is somewhere like Bransbury Common, which very often does have them. You could go there maybe 2 hours before sunset, and you've got a chance of seeing them hunting. If you went during the afternoon, you'd be lucky. I just don't think they would, because they've only got to catch a couple of things, and then that's enough food. Occasionally we get long-eared owl in amongst the short-eared owls at Bransbury, but trying to tell a long-eared owl from a short-eared owl at 5 minutes before sundown is quite hard.
1 or 2 still coming in, Keith. This one's around wintering chiffchaffs. Are they a separate population to the breeding birds we have here?
Yeah, quite a lot of them are. So quite a lot of the chiffchaffs that come and join us in the winter are from Europe. Whether or not some of our chiffchaffs stay, I don't know. I think it's possibly unlikely. I suspect our chiffchaffs head down to Spain, and probably the birds we get are coming over from Scandinavia. So quite a lot of the chiffchaffs are what we call them Siberian chiffchaff. It's actually a race of the chiffchaff. It's not a different species. But they're very hard to tell apart. They've got a slightly different call. They're much duller. And if you catch them in the hand, they're really very similar, but they're just a different color. So that one of the things we're doing now is taking DNA from these birds by just taking a little feather and having it analyzed for DNA. And the DNA will tell us whether it's a Siberian chiffchaff or not. So the answer is, I think a lot of them are from elsewhere.
Thanks, Keith. Just a bit of advice back to the short-eared owls. Apparently, they are hunting in Farlington to be seen early in the morning.
Right.
They've been spotting while some of the guys have been ringing. So just as
yeah, Yeah, that's a good point. I guess early early morning and late in the day are the two times when short-eared owls. I mean, I guess if they hadn't been successful hunting the night before, they'd go out early on. The long-eared owls come out late though. Long-eared owls, they don't hunt much during the day. They hunt at night, as do tawnies.
Keith, I think that's about it. No more questions coming in. So on behalf of everybody, I'm going to say a big thank you for your talk and presentation tonight. I do hope everyone's found it, as I'm sure many of us have, it highly interesting, informative, and some good guidance on where to go looking over the next few months. Just a quick FYI for everybody. First of all, thank you for everyone that joined us tonight. We were just we hit 70. At our peak. The intention will be to post tonight's talk on the HOS website, so please look out for that over the coming days, and also look out for future talks coming up. If you haven't signed up for next week, whilst the first batch has been sold out, we are looking to run it potentially second run. But also we're very keen to understand what other topics members are keen to listen to over the future weeks. So if you've not posted any thoughts already, please do share them via Nicola Whitmarsh, who's very kindly helping with administration of all of these talks as we take them forward over the next few months. So again, thanks for everyone for joining tonight. I wish you all well, and take care and enjoy what's left of your evening. Good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Keith.